something a lot of us don't think about in the West, and that is what our governments are putting other countries through in the name of quote-unquote spreading democracy and freedom. I was watching this soldier today on the Soapbox. It's Soapbox puts out very interesting anti-imperialist videos, and this soldier was describing his time in Iraq. He gave this order to smash through a building. There was fire coming out of this building. They'd been bombing various buildings, and he was pretty sure that there were civilians in the buildings, and he gave this order to because there was machine gun fire coming out of a building, and he gave an order to send this bomb through the building, basically to make a doorway so that they could go in. And when he went inside, there was a 14-year-old dead on the ground and a 6-year-old dead on the ground, and the father was there was the father there on the ground, but he said he was sort of a real mess, and you can imagine that would be the case. And the mother, and the mother was slightly bleeding from her forehead. So basically, her whole family, if that was her whole family that were there at the time, her whole family were killed in an instant. And this particular U.S. soldier said when he went inside and he saw this, all he could do was he felt like he wanted to tear his hair out, and he started crying. And the mother, who just lost her family right before her, and her husband was probably laying in pieces on the ground, she came up to him and said, "Inshallah," meaning it's God's will. And he said to himself, "No, this isn't God's will. This is, I gave the orders and, basically killed her family." And he said, "I have to live with that." I've heard stories like this before, and it's not some sort of aberration. It's not an aberration, it's something that goes on every day. Just like when we saw the video of the Chelsea Manning, the whistleblower Chelsea Manning, the hero Chelsea Manning, who supplied this video of, and many, many other documents that expose war crimes and corruption of the US. She gave this to WikiLeaks, and of course she's paid for it ever since. And Julian Assange, of course, is paying for it as well, probably with his life. And that what was contained in one of those files of the many that Chelsea Manning gave to WikiLeaks and to Julian Assange was collateral murder. Now, a lot of people were shocked by that. That happened in 2007. I don't know if you hopefully you've seen it, and if you haven't, you should have a look at it. I could only watch it once because it's sort of it's really horrifying to watch. It's horrifying to watch because basically people on the ground are being mowed down on film, probably, and blown to bits basically from I think it was an Apache helicopter, and they use very large artillery shells, and it usually can just make people, just blow them to bits basically. They also attacked a vehicle that came to help the wounded, and there were 2 children inside, and the father was blown to bits, and one of the I think one of the children was possibly dead, and the other one was taken by a soldier to be treated, but who knows, I don't know what happened to her. But she was, or he, I'm not sure, I think maybe it was a little boy, I'm not sure, but they were very badly injured. So when the soldiers came up and saw that vehicle, one of them, the vehicle that came to look after the wounded, he sort of basically threw up. The sound of the guns firing at those people on the ground including a couple of journalists, and they were all killed, of course. And the sound of the basic narration of the people who were shooting them was pretty awful too. It was just viewing them as nothing, basically. But the sound of that gunfire, when I hear it, it makes my skin crawl, because I know what's happening at the other end of that rat-a-tat sort of thing. So I don't even have to watch that film anymore for it to have a visceral effect on me. Because I'm sure you can probably, if you follow my channel, or if you don't, I'm sure that you think to yourself, you must at some point, must cross your mind that these people are, they're really just like us. And can you imagine sort of just walking around town and having some helicopter appear, and then suddenly they're firing on you, and you can see people being blown to bits in front of you, and you know you're probably going to be next because they're not going to miss anybody. And like I say, what that soldier was describing in that soapbox video is not an aberration. It's something that's happening every day, throughout the day. And what's happening in that collateral murder video is something that's happening every day. It's admitted by soldiers that that's not an unusual thing. And if you've listened to Eyes Left podcasts by Mike Preisner and Spencer Rapone, occasionally they've had on soldiers who have described some of what they've been through. Clifton Hicks comes to mind, who said he went into Afghanistan. He's a veteran from the Afghanistan war, and he said they went into a village, a town, Abu Ghraib, and he saw hundreds of people, about 700 people, I think he said, laying on the ground, including animals, and they basically had mowed people down in a free fire zone. When they do free fire, they basically fire on anybody, non-human or human, and that's actually a thing. And so these people, like Clifton Hicks and the soldier who described, I'm sorry, his name doesn't come to mind, the soldier who described that incident where he killed that family, they have to live with that too. If they actually come out the other side with their humanity, they have to live with that too. Mike Preisner, who is Abby Martin's partner, he described some of the things that he did when he's a veteran, and he was in Iraq right in the beginning. He said he realized when he was told, basically there was this old man who they were trying to get information out of, and in Iraq, and he had to bang a chair against the wall to kind of frighten this man. And he realized that every time a bunch of interrogators came in to interrogate this man, he realized that he started feeling like he wanted to protect that man from his fellow comrades, from his fellow soldiers. And it was then that he realized that he was the terrorist. He was there occupying their country, and he was the terrorist, not them. And Clifton Hicks, I think, explained how difficult it is to how much you're mocked when you realize that this is immoral what you're doing. He realized that that they do everything they can, the officers and the upper echelon of the military, to either make you feel like you're some sort of a weakling having those feelings, and they mock you, and then they transfer you to some area of department where you're doing some sort of desk work for a while, and then they put you back in. And he realized they were going to keep also sending him back to Afghanistan until probably he left in a body bag. But they have no finer feelings if you end up destroyed as a human being. These are the soldiers. If you end up destroyed as a human being, as many do, because they can't live with what they've done. And I don't know what the stats are now, but I think it's been about 22 veterans a day suicide. And I'd say most of that would probably be PTSD from doing things that were horrific and not being able to live with them in just normal society, because you were doing all that horrific stuff in someone else's country, and maybe it seemed fairly normal then, and it was what you were told to do, and you followed orders, sometimes against one's better judgment. But when you're there, it seems like it's normal and the right thing to do. Then you go back home, and everything is moving on without you, and everything is well, it's kind of peacetime, and then suddenly you have to live with those dreadful memories. So this is a doubly immoral thing that's happening to soldiers, to the people in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere in the world. There's 8+ wars going on, which with US involvement, I'm losing count. And the same horrific stuff happens in every country. And all the bombing that goes on is really so that there's less US soldier casualties. So they just bomb the bejesus out of towns, killing many, many people, innocent people. And I include the people who they're trying to kill, who are defending, they're defending their country against a brutal occupation. I don't see them either as, terrorists. I mean, you would do the same if someone was bombing your home and bombing your family and bombing the town you lived in, and then going around bursting into homes and interrogating people and terrifying children and all of that. You would probably possibly want to take up arms as well. To think that, that is somehow becoming a terrorist because you are defending your home and your family is just a nonsense, really. And I live in a very quiet area here, and far away from all of that. But my government has involved us in Australia in all the awfulness that goes on every single day. And I resent that so much. I resent it, and I also feel disgusted. I feel disgusted too with the fact that there's barely an anti-war movement here in Australia. And in some ways there's barely an anti-war movement at the epicenter of all of this, the US empire. There's barely an anti-war movement in the US. And that's why I spend a lot of time on this channel talking about anti-imperialism and presenting independent journalists who are anti-imperialists, anti-war activists and journalists, because it's essential. There has to be a grassroots movement, an anti-war grassroots movement. Otherwise, if we're not pushing back, if the public is not pushing back against this immoral destruction of these people in other countries who happen to be brown and black people, it's a white supremacist thing that we're doing. If we're not involved in that and we're not pushing back against it, then the governments have no reason to stop what they're doing. They see that as a complicit okay, basically, and okay with what they're involved in. Would they stop if there was a big push against it? I mean, if most of the citizens of the US, the 330 million, even if half of them was pushing against that, would they stop? Well, if it meant that people were going to vote, I suppose if they were going to vote out people who were imperialist warmongers, maybe they would, because they value their careers more than anything. Would they stop, though, other than fear of losing their careers? I don't know. I think the oligarchy and the politicians, a lot of them there are quite happy using the military on their own people. And that's where it all comes back. I mention this every so often on my channel, that everything that we do to others, and that includes non-human animals, eventually it all comes back to affect us as well. There's nothing that happens, as that saying goes, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can start thinking about others as part of the human family. We can go vegan as well, and because non-human animals are part of the family on this planet, part of their fellow earthlings, sentient animals. So we can, everything that happens to non-human animals, eventually, in some way, the violence will come back to us, because they're the most vulnerable group on the planet. And if you're also torturing and killing and oppressing human groups that are vulnerable, like Palestinians or whatever, then that will eventually come back to you too. Because it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. And look, it's happening right now in the US. The government is treating, you can see it in plain sight with this COVID-19, how the government is just the public are an afterthought with these bailouts. They're only interested in giving money to corporations. They're not even that interested in small businesses even. It's just corporations, big corporations. So it's clear that the government, and it doesn't matter what side either, it doesn't matter in this duopoly in the US, either side do not care about you. They do not care about the American public. So, and I would say that if there was a large uprising against the government, that they would happily get the military in and start mowing people down. And sometimes when that happens, when you actually get the military in to oppress the people, their fellow citizens, that's sometimes where the military refuse to do it, and that's sometimes when empires fall, or authoritarian groups, governments fall. So that remains to be seen if that ever happens in the US. But I think at some point there's going to be some catalyst that happens where the empire is going to fall, and it's going to be when the military wake up. People in the military start killing people in their own country and realize that it's wrong. You can see the little pademelons in the background there. It's hard sometimes to live with the knowledge that all this unnecessary, horrific violence is happening in other countries, and we're living in a relatively peaceful Western country, but our governments are responsible for the massacre and killing of people just like us. And there isn't even any any discussion here in Australia about imperialism and joining in US imperialist wars. Not even any discussion by any party, whether it's the Labour Party or the Liberal Party, the Coalition, the Green Party. They don't even know how to, they don't even care about press freedom because they've abandoned Julian Assange. All of them, pretty much, except for maybe one or two people. So US imperialism is normalized, and politicians are afraid of criticizing the US, which is really unfortunate. And I have no respect. I have no respect for politicians that are quiet and just pretend, just basically go along with whatever the US tells us to. Like the Labour Party's gone along with recognizing Juan Guaido, a self-appointed right-wing person who's invited the military in, the US military in, to invade his country. Imagine that. This is the Labour Party, the Australian Labour Party, ignoring democratically elected leaders and recognizing someone who's appointed themselves, who's invited the US military to come in and invade his country. I mean, the shame of it. The shame. And if we just allow, if you're an Australian and you're not anti-war, I invite you to please think about following some of the journalists who I mention on my channel, like the Empire Files, the Grey Zone, Mint Press News, and start to educate yourself about what Australia is being involved in. The US needs to be recognized for the rogue state, murderous, rogue capitalist state that it is, spreading death and destruction. It's a death machine. It's a death machine. And if we're not saying anything, then we are part of that death machine. We are part of it. We are complicit in it. We're complicit in that family that was murdered. We're complicit in that whole town that was butchered, and the animals. We're complicit in those journalists being mowed down and those people that were with them, and tanks running over one of them and laughing, US soldiers laughing about it. We're complicit with Chelsea Manning having been tortured and imprisoned. She's a whistleblower hero. We're complicit with Assange, Julian Assange, probably sacrificing his life at this point. We're complicit in all of that if we don't say something. And they're not going to stop until we all say something. All of us. They want us to be apathetic. They ignored the huge march against the Iraq War in 2003. I was part of that march in Sydney. They ignored that and they went along anyway. But if everyone pushed back against this violence, which is going to visit all of us eventually, and is visiting us in some ways, if we don't push back against this, then we are complicit in mass murder. Anyway, I shed a few tears when I watched that. I shed a few tears when I watched that Collateral Murder. I shed a few tears when I watched that soldier talking about that mother responding with Inshallah. I don't know where they'd be if they didn't have their faith, basically, because what we're doing is just so barbaric to them every single day. I don't know how anyone would cope and try and make sense of it. Anyhow, I'll see if I can show the video of that most recent description by that soldier. And you know how it's gotten to this point where there's so many wars now and it's been so normalized? Because there is no anti-war movement. there's also a complicit mainstream media, corporate-owned mainstream media, that is just pretending like that's not going on. It's like it's not even happening. And also cowardly politicians that care about their own careers more than doing what's right. But we have the power. We, the people, have the power to address this and to stop it. We do. Anyway, thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time. Bye for now.
No, it wasn't God's will. It was my fucking order. I gave the order to fire those rockets into that building, and I killed her family. A few months after I was there, I mean, a lot of things weren't sitting right with me. The command structure, the missions that we were getting didn't make any sense. We're going after people, Mujahideen or Muj, and they didn't have any idea which ones were the right ones. We're kicking in the wrong doors, terrifying children, helicopters screaming over their heads at night, and I'm trying to calm the women and children while the men were dragged and separated out and completely humiliated in front of their families. In that culture, it's a very big deal to be treated with respect in front of your family, just as it is in ours. But in this, I mean, it can mean a lot of shame. When I really, really, really came to the point where I knew that what we were doing was absolutely morally wrong was when I was a part of the cordon where we cordoned it off, and then we made operations to move in, and 2 o'clock in the morning we went across the berm and instantly started taking casualties, but started lighting up this city like you wouldn't believe. Artillery strikes going in and planes flying in and dropping 500-pound J-down bombs into obviously civilian areas. I mean, my platoon was tasked with moving down a certain sector from the north side of the city, and of course we had to take every building block that we went through, and we had already come up to a four-story like apartment building, and we had encountered heavy resistance from there, and there was no way that we were going to be able to clear it with using people, so we called an airstrike on it, a helicopter strike with it, and after a couple of them, the building just completely collapsed in. And I was thinking at the time, man, how many civilians could have been inside there? I mean, just like any kind of conflict, there's people that are hiding inside places. They're unable to come out of these buildings out of fear that they're going to be killed by the enemy or our enemy for leaving, or out of fear that they're going to get shot in the streets, because when they do, they come out and they do get shot in the streets trying to get away. We moved down another block and we came up to a smaller building, and my squad was tasked with taking this building, and the doorway, there was fire coming out of the doorway, machine gun fire, and from the windows. So I had an attachment of SMAs, which are rockets, like a 2-man team of rockets, and you can use these rockets to blow holes, make another doorway, if you will, in the side of the building. So I gave the order for them to use the missiles on the building. So we hit it, and then we stormed into the building, and there was 2 about a 14-year-old kid, a 6-year-old kid, and a young, maybe this could have been her husband, I couldn't tell because he was so messed up, and a woman that was bleeding, but not severely, and all she was screaming, "Why, Laish, Laish," and I broke down. I leaned up against the wall, and as my rest of my Marines cleared through the building, and I sat there with the corpsman trying to do something about it. But I started to cry. I wanted to rip my hair out, what hair I did have, and go nuts. And with a woman seeing my reaction, came up to me and put her hand on my cheek and said, Inshallah, which is God's will. Because these people over there, it doesn't matter what bad things happen to them, that they can accept it right away as God's will because they're deeply religious. But no, it wasn't God's will. It was my fucking order. I gave the order to fire those rockets into that building, and I killed her family. And that's when I knew that I was put in a situation where I had to do that. I thought I had to do that to keep myself and my Marines alive, thinking that, well, man, that was the best thing I could do at the time. Well, I have to live with that decision.